brown skin, and they hate my brown eyes, and they hate that we'll represent those three colors with our lives. Oh, you was born in America, you gotta choose a side. Pero tengo sangre azteca, and I say that shit with pride. You in love with our culture, and you in love with our music. You screaming, build that wall, but you in love with Taco Tuesday.
And this one on the origin
I'm an alien
of the
in your
Hispanic gangs. A lot of people think this is a different country's problem, but they come from right here in America. So let's get over to the table, and we're going to get right into it. In 1781, 11 families were sent under the Spanish rule, which had taken over the Aztec Empire, to California to capture that territory, because California was still largely indigenous land. Those 11 families built what became Los Angeles, marking the founding of the city. Later, California became a part of Mexico after Mexico gained its independence from Spain. So now on to President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, the famous Mexican general and multiple-time president. President Lopez told his men that he wanted to be eating breakfast in Texas. So that night, him and his men slaughtered a whole city. Women, children, everyone. What is later known as the Alamo in 1836, a brutal siege where nearly 200 Texan defenders were killed after a 13-day standoff, fueling Texan cries of revenge and cementing Santa Anna's image as a ruthless conqueror. Years later, at the time of the Guadalupe Treaty, he was wanted by the United States authorities for what happened there in the Alamo. He was the president, and he didn't personally sign the treaty. 3 Mexican representatives did, but he oversaw it. Back then, the president had full control due to corruption and power structures. The important thing to remember is Mexican people did not want to give up that land. These were territories they had fought for during their independence from Spain. But through the treaty, those lands, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California, were given to the United States. After that, he was no longer being pursued by the U.S. authorities into what historians call exile. That treaty, about 200,000 Mexicans became American citizens. They were supposed to keep their land and civil rights, and they had the choice to either stay or move to Mexico. But those promises were not upheld. Laws were put in place that stripped Mexicans of their land rights, leaving many families displaced across their territories. Legal tricks like inflated taxes and fraudulent claims, forcing ranchers off vast holdings they'd worked for generations. Scattering communities into urban barrios where survival meant sticking together against Anglo newcomers who saw them as invaders on their soil, planting seeds of distrust no amount of hard work could uproot. By the early 1900s, California had become predominantly white domain. Even though it had once been Mexican territory, the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1920 caused many refugees to come into the United States, especially Los Angeles. Over 1 million Mexican migrants moved north, but they were immediately viewed with suspicion. Institutions and press described them as dirty, lazy, and a threat to the American Southwest. In the 1920s, mass deportations under Hoover went up to 2 million people of Mexican descent, including U.S. citizens, were rounded up and shipped south amid economic fears, their homes raided at dawn, families loaded into trains like cattle, all under headlines branding them public enemies, draining American resources. A pattern of blame that ignored their labor in building of railroads, farms, and cities. At the same time, discrimination was everywhere. For example, black and Mexican Americans were not allowed to use public swimming pools unless it was the day before the pool would be cleaned. In public places, step off sidewalks to let the white individuals pass. Mexican Americans were also targeted. If you were Hispanic and alone, it could be dangerous. Police and others could beat you or tell you to go back to your neighborhood. Schools segregated Mexican kids into underfunded classes labeled for freebie-minded, while signs in restaurants read "No dogs" or "Mexicans allowed," hammering home that belonging was a white-only privilege. Yet these same families powered the economy, picking crops and sweating in factories. Their loyalty to America questioned at every turn. Because of this, people began forming groups for protection. Due to the segregation, Hispanic Americans were not allowed to leave their barrios. If they did leave their barrios, they were ostracized, arrested, and sometimes beaten. So they formed groups identifying with whatever their barrio they weren't allowed to leave was during this time. Young Latinos could not go out alone because if you were caught alone, you would most likely be beaten. These groups included car clubs, sport teams, and social circles. Over time, some of these groups evolved into formal gangs, especially in southwest cities. Early precursors like the White Fence Gang in East LA, formed in 1930s amid a barrio isolation from La Parismia Church, was also a sports team, or the Slossons in South Central, which started as an athletic club, but hardened into turf-defending crews by the post-war era, blending Mexican-American pride with street survival against Anglo raids. These weren't random thugs, they were young vatos branding together in places like Boyle Heights and Pico Union, where lowriders cruising Whittier Boulevard became symbols of resistance. Their plaques and murals shouting barrio loyalty amid constant threats, not glorifying violence, but young people creating family in a world that offered none, much like how oppressed groups everywhere formed bonds to endure. In the early 1900s, figures like Pancho Villa emerged, seen by some as a good guy and others a bad guy, and some Mexicans seen him as their last stand. Then in the 1920s, millions of Mexicans crossed the Rio Grande searching for better lives. By the 1940s, World War II changed everything. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Over 2,000 Americans in 90-minute raid died. President Roosevelt declared war.
December 7, 1941, a state of war has existed.
In this tense atmosphere, attention turned to Mexican-American youth. Authorities in Los Angeles Police Department claimed there was a Mexican-American crime wave and pushed the idea that these young people were a threat. Pachucos, who wore zoot suits to express their identity, high-waisted, baggy pants, long coats with padded shoulders, and ducktail haircuts, symbolizing defiance and dandyism, drawn from Harlem jazz culture, stood out and were especially targeted. These Pachuco clubs, like the 38th Street Gang, led by figures like Mischief or Gloves, weren't just style crews. They were barrio defenders, clashing with rivals and outsiders, laying groundwork for the structured Hispanic gang culture that exploded post-war. With vatos claiming hoods like Hazard and Premeta Flats, the Zoot Suit riots of 1943 crystallized it. Mobs of white servicemen beat Pachucos senseless on the streets, stripping them, burning their suits, even tarred and feathering some. Cops arrested the victims, newspapers calling them juvenile delinquents, threatening the home front. Just as today, politicians labeling barrios infested with criminals, echoing that same playbook. Fear justified crackdowns, blind to how these kids were American-born, fighting the same wars, yet painted as the enemies in their own home. Even though a Mexican-American showed bravery fighting in World War II, they were still treated as outsiders at home. The Mexican community had long been viewed as a threat to the white Los Angeles society. Pachuco numbers swelled to the thousands by the early 1940s, with initiations involving fights or crimes that bonded members for life, evolving into a familia loyalty seen in later with the Sureños and Norteños splits, influenced by prison politics. Post-war, as black and brown soldiers returned to their neighborhoods, those protection groups deepened. East LA's Premeta Flats and Hazard crews formalized rules around respect, colors, and hoods, while South Central influenced dozens more. Later on, communities like Chavez Ravine were affected by displacement again. Families were forced from their homes to build Dodger Stadium. While many left peacefully under eminent domain, others resisted and were forcibly removed and dragged from their homes. And today, when crowds chant about walls and deportation, calling migrants animals, poisoning the blood of the nation, rhetoric straight from the mouth of the Zoot Suit riots, branding Mexicans as rapists and criminals, pouring over the border. It's the same script, recycled. An echo of President Hoover. These weren't and aren't outsiders threatening America. These are builders, fighters, and families forged and inspired. Let me know how you guys like the video. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're going to be doing more.